Hi friends, welcome to the Share, Invite, and Proclaim channel. My name is Judy. The topic for today is about Israel's stones of remembrance and American stones. It comes from our American history, but also from Joshua chapter 4. And it goes like this. Now it came about when all the nation had crossed the Jordan that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, "Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and command them, saying, Take up for yourselves 12 stones out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, and carry them over with you." Now these were big stones because they had to carry them on their shoulders. "And it's a sign among you that when your children ask later, what do these stones mean? They have an opportunity to share their history." And it was a turning point for the history of Israel. They left one past of slavery in Egypt to a new future as a nation. But it would not be without struggle and faith. Joshua was instructed then to have these 12 men take these stones from the river the Jordan and carry them to the other side as a memorial stone. The Jews practice or celebrate Hanukkah today to recount that history of their country, of their history. Well, what is our Jordan River? What is our turning point in our history? Well, we could say that it's our American Revolution, but even within the American Revolution, a turning point was the Battle of Saratoga, where 7,000 British soldiers surrendered to Americans, and the turning point was that with this win, France was willing to officially recognize America as an independent country and send troops and give us loans. Within our American Revolution, we have the Declaration of Independence, and it lists our problems with Britain, and explains why we needed our independence. And with this declaration, it showed that colonists were now fighting for their independence, for their citizenship, not just British citizenship. Congress adopted the draft on July 4th, 1776. And so 244 years later, we're celebrating July 4th as a celebration as well. But what are the 12 stones to remember about our country and our leaders and our history? Well, I have 10. Maybe you can come up with some others. The first is leadership, the stone of leadership. Listen to this group of leaders. George Washington, he was the commander of the Army. John Adams, the legislative guy. Thomas Jefferson, helping to write the Declaration of Independence. Ben Franklin, a diplomat. James Madison, a legislative man. Alexander Hamilton, a money man. Roger Sherman from Connecticut, he signed all 4 documents of early American history of the Declaration, well, even before that, the Olive Branch Petition, the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. Pretty important man. In 20th century, we think of Dwight Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, George Patton, Douglas MacArthur, Harry Truman, FDR, Winston Churchill, and George Marshall. These were strong leaders of the World War II era. A second stone is the stone of courage. For Joshua, God told him 4 times in one chapter, chapter 1, to not be afraid. He needed courage to face the enemies of Israel, to fight at great risk. Most of the time, Israel was outnumbered 2-1. But God would say, "The battle is mine. I will give your enemy into your hands." Now, Washington demonstrated courage to become the commander of the Continental Army, always outnumbered 2-1. Washington disliked the British Army. He disliked the arrogance of their commanders. Whereas Joshua was told to go forward into the Promised Land, Washington had to use a different tactic. He had to use a retreat strategy. using guerrilla warfare because of his small army. He especially demonstrated courage at Valley Forge when he refused to give up during the hard winter. Washington drew his strength from God. He prayed for God's direction. He attended any local church where he was on a Sunday. It didn't matter. He was going to attend there because he wanted to worship God. Officially, he was a member of the Anglican Church, but in his letters to the Continental Congress, he always talked about perseverance and courage. Each of these leaders, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Franklin, Hamilton, Sherman, Madison, each of these leaders demonstrated courage because they became targets for the British to hunt them down and hang them. In the face of superior British forces, little supplies, bad weather, few trained American voluntary soldiers, many of them served their 3-month period and then went back home, with the exception of 2 famous men, Henry Knox, who brought cannons from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston, and Nathaniel Greene, who served with Washington, both these men, for the entire length of the war. Nathaniel Greene was a Quaker, and Quakers were opposed to war, but Quakers were also opposed to slavery, and he felt like the American colonies were slaves to Great Britain. Another stone is the stone of perseverance. Washington communicated to Congress always with perseverance, with patience, with courage, and for 8 long years, fighting with little troops and supplies, his perseverance was to stay the course. For our history in the Civil War, in World War I and World War II, it was war all out, no holds barred, fight to win, because the cause of freedom was high. Another stone is the stone of unity. The different regions united. Rhode Islanders, or those from Connecticut or Massachusetts or New Hampshire or Maine, New Yorkers, they had never met Virginians or North and South Carolinians. But you had leaders and volunteer soldiers fighting together to defend our country, and that's how it has been in our wars, especially overseas. We are Americans fighting for our country. Another stone is the stone of trustworthiness, or being trustful. Washington told his Congress about his successes and his failure. He didn't candy coat anything. He had the integrity of his soldiers, and many of his generals had also this quality, and they trusted him and were willing to fight under his leadership. Another stone is the stone of sacrifice of life, the sacrifice of people willing to die for their freedom, for their children's freedom, for their grandchildren's freedom. In the American Revolution, 317,000 Americans died, estimated. British, only 57,000. In the Civil War, 3 million. World War I, 38 million worldwide. In World War II, 80 million worldwide. So the stone of sacrifice to fight for freedom is very real. Another stone is the financial sacrifice. Haim Solomon, he was a Jewish patriot and an American spy for Washington. He loaned money to members of Congress like James Madison, interest-free. Thomas Nelson Jr., who also signed the Declaration of Independence from Yorktown, Virginia, he gave much of his wealth to support the colonists. British generals invaded his home as a base, and Nelson used his own money to pay for the French fleet and troops to come to America from the Caribbean islands. Nelson was a Christian, and he asked for fasting and prayer. During the final battle against British Cornwallis, Nelson ordered his men to fire upon his own home. 3 cannonballs still are in the side of his home. Richard Stockton of New Jersey signed the Declaration. He was captured and put on a prison ship. His home in New Jersey was destroyed. One of the few surviving prison ships left his children a letter describing all the tenets of Christianity. John Hart of New Jersey signed the Declaration. He was a wealthy man hunted by the British for a year. He was in his 60s, hiding with his 13 children. And after the war, John gave his land for a Baptist church in Hopewell, New Jersey, where he's buried. Robert Morris of Pennsylvania signed the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. He was the wealthiest man in America. In 1776 alone, he loaned the Congress $10,000 to pay for supplies for their army. He also suggested a national bank called the Bank of North America so that they could use this bank to deposit money, exchange different coins, and also to get loans from the Netherlands and France. After the war, Washington wanted him to become the Secretary of the Treasury, and he refused, but he did recommend Alexander Hamilton. He died in poverty in 1806. Another stone is the stone of political freedom. The British set up our political system that mirrored their own executive, legislative, and judicial branches. But in the 1770s, Britain began to tax the colonists to pay for the French and Indian War. The French had aligned with the Indians against the Americans and the British, but it cost Britain quite a bit of money, and they wanted money back. And so they began taxing the American colonists. The Sugar Act, Ordering, Townsend's Tea Act, Stamp Act, all of those would tax different items in the American economy. They also passed laws to limit the power of Americans, like the Navigation Laws or the Declaratory Act or the Coercive Act. All of these acts convinced enough colonists that their freedom was under attack and they had enough and they were willing to fight for their independence. Another stone is the stone of religious freedom. Some Protestant denominations were prevented by the Anglican Church, which was the Church of England, to worship, where their ministers were put in jail. This happened frequently in Virginia. Although Washington was a member of the Anglican Church, he did not approve of this new rule that the Anglican Church had, and that was to tax people to support the church, their grounds, the salary of the pastor. They would be charged a fee if they didn't attend worship. Well, finally, the Protestant churches did not have to follow this rule after the American Revolution, and the Anglican Church became the Episcopalian Church in America. Another stone is the stone of faith. Let me give you some examples of the faith of the colonists. Dr. Benjamin Rush of Pennsylvania, he signed the Declaration. He served under 3 presidents, Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. He started the U.S. Mint to print new coins and new paper money, rather than using the Spanish and the British coins in our country. He founded the Sunday School movement. He founded the Bible Society to mass produce the Bible. He supported the reading of Bible in schools. And he also was a member of the National Abolitionist Society to end slavery. Another man of faith was Charles Carroll of Maryland, the only Catholic who signed the Declaration. He was wealthy. He was a strong Christian who supported his church and his pastor. His favorite book of the Bible was the Ephesians. John Hancock, president of the Continental Congress, the first to sign the Declaration, he was a member of the Sons of Liberty, the first governor of Massachusetts. He regularly called for days of fasting and prayer and always had a minister pray before each session of the state Congress. John Weatherspoon of New Jersey, he signed the Declaration. He was president of Princeton University and a minister, and he encouraged ministers to become chaplains for the Army to help soldiers with their faith in time of war. American belief in the Bible, the worship of God, it changed our nation and changed lives. It can still happen when we hold Scripture up as truth. When we worship God, our nation can still be changed and lives saved. Sometimes God calls us to do something that we have never done before. Do we need courage or sacrifice or perseverance or faith to start this new path? Sometimes we need an extra measure of these qualities, like we did in World War II. Evil had to be stopped on a world stage to keep our country and all republics free from tyranny and captivity. God moved the Israelites from the tyranny of Egypt and its Pharaoh and slavery and moved them to a new life, a new land, a new opportunity to worship him in freedom and to teach their children what God had done for them. We have just celebrated 244 years of freedom. Not only must we support these essential qualities in our leaders like leadership and courage, perseverance, faith and sacrifice, integrity and freedom, but remember the leaders who had these true qualities and they set in motion this new country long ago. Teach them to our younger generation. Thanks for watching and have a great 4th of July.